Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa, France 24's program focused on the continent. I'm Charlie James, filling in for Georgia Calvin-Smith, and here's what's coming up. Tigray struck by yet another round of Ethiopian military strikes. The bombardment forced a UN humanitarian plane to turn away from Mekelle, with all aid flights currently on hold. Fed up over unpaid wages, port workers in Congo storm their employers' headquarters and clash with police. Port workers and teachers are striking, demanding better benefits. And hundreds of thousands in the Central African Republic are currently on the run inside their own country. Our reporters take you to one town where residents fled armed rebels. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. For the fourth day this week, the Ethiopian government launched an airstrike on the capital of the northern Tigray region. Humanitarian sources say the airstrike hit a university in Mekelle Friday and that 11 civilians were injured. But the government says it targeted a former military base. The strikes also forced a United Nations humanitarian flight to abandon its landing in the capital. This appears to be an escalation in authorities' intimidation tactics against aid workers as the years-long Tigray war intensifies.
UN humanitarian flight that departed Addis Ababa this morning was first forced to turn back in the midst of its flight after airstrikes began in Mekelle. I can confirm that the government was informed of that flight before it took off, and of course also confirmed that the flight was forced to turn back in midair because of the events on the ground. While we're still ascertaining all of the facts in relation to this event, we're obviously concerned about what has taken place today and what it means for humanitarian operations in northern Ethiopia moving forward. As of today, there are around 7 million people in northern Ethiopia in desperate need of humanitarian assistance. That includes over 5 million people in the Tigray region, and the other 2 million are split between Amhara and Afar.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, two major labor groups are now on strike: port workers and school teachers. Hundreds of workers from the state-owned ports company stormed its headquarters on Friday, furious over being owed years' worth of pay. The incident follows hundreds of children storming Parliament on Thursday, demanding a resolution for teachers. Laurent Berstecker takes a closer look.
A tense standoff near the port of Kinshasa. Congolese police fired tear gas and rubber bullets to dislodge hundreds of workers who had stormed the headquarters of the state-owned port company. The employees smashed windows, burned furniture, and threw projectiles at security forces, marking a violent escalation of their week-long strike to demand what they say are years of unpaid wages.
Le gouvernement congolais devait nous donner 207 millions. Nous avons pour les autres 32 mois d'impayement. Pour les anciens, c'est 42 mois d'impayement. C'est inexplicable.
It was the latest example of growing social unrest over wages in the DRC. Earlier this month, Congolese teachers also went on strike over issues of salaries, bonus pay, and retirement age. The strike boiled over on Thursday as hundreds of school children stormed Parliament to demand an end to the crisis and assert their right to education.
Ça fait déjà 2 semaines qu'on ne s'occupe pas. Les professeurs sont en grève quand on leur demande de nous enseigner, ils nous disent que non, ils vont enseigner jusqu'à l'année prochaine.
Striking teachers say they barely earn enough money to make a living and are asking the government to double their monthly salaries.
Authorities in Eswatini have now banned protests in an attempt to silence the pro-democracy movement. Formerly known as Swaziland, the nation is Africa's last absolute monarchy, and since June has been rocked by demonstrations. The kingdom has also deployed the army and placed limits on internet access. Nurses there are now refusing to treat police officers, accusing them of shooting their colleagues during a rally this week. Regional mediators are seeking to resolve the unrest that has left at least 30 people dead. In January, rebels from the UPC armed group in the Central African Republic seized Bengasu, a small town in the country's southeast. More than 20,000 people sought safety in the bush and the neighboring Democratic Republic of Congo. While most of those displaced in January have returned, more than 100,000 people previously displaced are still living between borders. Carol, Valad, and Clemente Roma report from Bangassou.
On the other bank, facing the port, lies the Democratic Republic of Congo. Thousands of Central Africans took refuge there after rebels captured Bangassou in January 2020. While most of the displaced Central Africans have now returned by boat, others still live between the two shores. After months of exile, this pastor is back in his native country for the very first time.
I thought I would at least find peace on the other side, but the situation is not peaceful. I lost everything during the crisis.
For those forced to flee far from the chaos and bullets, history repeats itself. A few miles away, memories of the civil war in 2013 or clashes in 2017 are all too familiar for the displaced. The Muslim district still bears the scars of clashes between militias 4 years ago, which left 140 dead.
They lost homes, they lost brothers and husbands and wives.
This Displaced Persons Association meets every week with Honoré, its vice president. Here, a group of women are still affected by the latest crisis.
We really struggle to get by. We cannot go to the fields since January, so we have nothing to eat.
Honoré leads us to his land, on the outskirts of the city. Sheltered from the tall grass, a family of Fulani herders has found refuge here after 2 years of displacement. Their herd was almost completely wiped out by armed groups.
We came to Bangassou to take refuge and find pasture. We were attacked 25 kilometers from here. Armed groups killed 2 of my brothers. We took refuge in the DRC for almost 2 years. Then we came back to the Central African Republic.
The latest crisis threw around 270,000 new displaced people on the road. A quarter of Central Africans either internally displaced or refugees outside their own borders.
South Sudan suffering its 3rd straight year of extreme flooding. Entire villages have been swept away or submerged, and thousands left homeless. The United Nations says the flooding has affected almost 500,000 people since May. With a 5-year civil war, hunger, and corruption all challenging the nation, climate change is adding to the misery, imperiling lives there.
Structures like roads and bridges have been washed away or have been destroyed by the floods, and so we found ourselves in a situation where we have limited access to affected communities, which means that these affected communities are therefore cut off from vital humanitarian assistance.
They are facing serious flood across the country, mostly on northern and the eastern part of the countries. 8 states out of 10 are affected by floods, and more than 700,000 right now affected by floods. And those people were also affected by drought and many other crises. So it's very critical humanitarian situation in southern Sudan.
Next, we're taking you to Uganda to learn more about one of the country's most famous activists. Stella Nizani is a strong critic of President Yoweri Museveni, who's been in power since 1986. And she has also shocked some with her, at times, sexually explicit protests. Nicholas Charmant tells you more.
Stella Nyanzi is a very determined feminist. The 47-year-old activist is often seen being dragged away from protests by Ugandan police officers. She's one of the country's fiercest critics of President Yoweri Museveni. He's been in power for 35 years. In 2017, Nyanzi spent 33 days in prison for calling Museveni a pair of buttocks. In court, she defended her position.
This regime has offended this country. I am happy to take on the mantle of insanity. I am happy to take on the mantle of the truth teller. If this mantle is going to be the only time that the regime will be told about its offense to the people of Uganda.
Nyanzi has nearly 300,000 followers on Facebook. She has been criticized by religious conservatives and some feminists because sometimes, to defend her causes, she takes her clothes off to attract media attention.
Uganda has died. We're no longer aware, we are deaf, we don't see, or we pretend we don't see what's happening in society, especially the excesses and violations and violence. And to be able to communicate in fresh ways is important. And I think that sexuality and using taboo topics or body parts is acceptable.
Her anger against the government grew 6 years ago when she lost her parents in quick succession because of a lack of access to reliable health care. She sometimes thinks about living in exile to protect her 3 children. But wherever she is, she will organize what she calls the liberation struggle to think beyond Museveni.
There are only 2 northern white rhinos left on Earth, a mother and her daughter living in Kenya. And now the 32-year-old mother, Najine, is being retired from a breeding program aimed at saving the species from extinction. That leaves only the daughter, Fatu, to donate eggs with the hope of fertilizing them with deceased male sperm and then implanting embryos into a similar species of rhino. The biorescue team hopes to be able to deliver its first northern white rhino calf in 3 years. That's all for this edition, but do stay with us here on France 24. More news up next.